Today we're joined by Ryan Charles, who's a former astrophysicist who's gone on to lead cryptocurrency projects at companies including BitPay and Reddit, and is currently the lead engineer at BitGo. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here, Eric.
Awesome. We're really excited about this one. We just wrapped up a really awesome talk segment where we talked a little bit about academia and sort of the university system and how it's sort of falling by the wayside. I know most of your history, but can you talk about where you came from? You were in astrophysics, right? You're doing your PhD. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess at this point it was maybe approximately 10 years ago. I decided to become a physicist. And I was in college at the time. I read a book on physics and I was very motivated about it. And I thought the prospect of spending my life doing physics was just awesome. I just thought that was the coolest thing ever. So I started studying physics. I went to grad school. I was in grad school for about 6 years studying high-energy astrophysics. And towards the end, I think it was the last 2 years of grad school for me, I discovered Bitcoin. And I still love physics to this day. I'm very motivated about physics. But Bitcoin was just this incredible opportunity, the way I saw it. I thought that the potential to really change the world was just absolutely enormous with Bitcoin. So I guess I had been in grad school for about 4 years at that point, had been studying physics for a total of about 6. When I discovered Bitcoin, and Bitcoin was sort of a hobby. So I stayed in grad school. I kept spending my days doing physics research. But basically at night or on weekends or whatever, I'd read about Bitcoin. I was on the Bitcoin forum and stuff back then. I didn't do very much programming when I first discovered it. I was just sort of a hobbyist, sort of an advocate. I tried to get people to adopt it. I tried to get people to accept it for selling stuff or whatever. About 2 years into that, so that was early 2011 when I discovered it. In early 2013, about 2 years later, Bitcoin had just basically grown dramatically, and it became big enough that I realized that I could make Bitcoin my career. So I decided to leave physics and go full-time Bitcoin.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to know when you left physics, and what exactly did you learn in that role that may have carried over, to what you were doing in Bitcoin and the various roles you've had since?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I think there's a lot that I learned. It's really difficult to sort of separate from what did I learn from grad school specifically and what would I have learned anyway. So obviously I learned a lot about physics. The actual body of knowledge of physics is mostly not useful to me, just because obviously I'm not focused on, most of the stuff that I knew is just not useful to me in my daily life. Some stuff I learned was very valuable. I mean, I really advocate at least having a basic understanding of physics to everyone, just because people don't realize the decisions they make in their life often are based on either an understanding or a misunderstanding of physics. So it's very easy, and there are lots of common misconceptions in physics. So the best thing anybody can do is just at least study enough physics that you can correct your misconceptions. So, for instance, in a vacuum, objects of different masses will all accelerate at the same rate. People think they will fall, the heavier thing falls faster. That's not true. They fall at the same rate. So there are countless misconceptions like that. So obviously, those basic things I learned, that's very helpful. There are lots of other just, there's one field of study that I learned that's really, really useful, which is called Bayesian probability theory. I don't necessarily, I don't do Bayesian probability theory calculations or anything like that on a daily basis, but there's a philosophy of this, and it's basically the philosophy of uncertainty. And that's very, very useful to me. I think about the world in terms of what I don't know rather than what I do, because that's just how it is. I don't know most things. And Bayesian probability theory gives me like a framework to understand, what I know and what I don't know. So that's probably the most useful sort of, mathy, sophisticated thing I learned in grad school. So there's a lot. But I also wonder, had I not gone to grad school, what else would I have learned? I would have learned different things, but it's hard to separate, what was, what did I learn that was, something I couldn't have learned elsewhere? And so that's harder to say. I mean, I learned very academic-y, mathy things, but I'm sure I would have learned other valuable lessons had I not spent so much time in academia.
And as a follow-up to that, the Bayesian probability theory, so it was something that actually taught you in grad school. You actually learned that there.
It was not, so I sort of went out of my way to study this. That's a great question. So I didn't actually take courses on Bayesian probability theory. This was something I learned myself to help with my own research. I learned sort of basic statistics when I was in college, but we didn't learn very much detailed. So I sort of went out of my way to really, really enhance my own understanding of this because I was an experimental physicist. And what that means is basically focusing on, rather than on coming up with theories or something, I was focused on running experiments and analyzing data and trying to either validate theories or try and, basically arrive at new discoveries that maybe aren't covered by theories or whatever. And we need statistics and we need probability theory to do experiment. So I learned it for my own sake. It wasn't something we learned, that I learned anyway in a class. It was something I learned mostly just by being, motivated to understand it and to learn what I knew I needed to know to do the work that I had to do.
Ryan, while we're on the topic of learning, this is a very interesting one to me, especially being so young, kind of really being in this industry and learning so much in the past few months. I'd like to know what you would recommend to young people maybe who are getting into Bitcoin, who really love the idea of the technology but don't understand the architecture of it, or don't understand how to program, how to actually make computers work for you instead of obviously you working for them. What would you recommend as the single best habit or tool you've adopted to master the work you do?
Sure. So so I've been programming for a very long time now, since I was a kid. And I've used many different programming languages, many different technologies over the years. These days I write primarily JavaScript, and I use like Mongo for the database and stuff. I mean, I use sort of hip modern technologies, but I've used many things over the years. The best thing for me is just to want to build something and just figure out how to actually build it. Almost everything I know about software I've learned by just trying to do it and having to figure out, what don't I know, what do I need to learn so that I can do it. So the absolute best thing you can do, it's not about choosing any particular technology or programming language or whatever. It's about just having a project and trying to do it. And you just have to figure out, what do I need? If you're making a website, you have to learn some basics about HTML and JavaScript if you want to do that. If you're making, I don't know, any conceivable other thing, maybe you like Raspberry Pis and you want to play with your lights or something by programming a Raspberry Pi. You will figure it out. So my number one suggestion for anybody who's sort of a beginner is to just come up with a project. What is something cool that you want to do, and just spend enough time so that you can figure out everything you need to figure out to do it. So just for a weekend or a week or for a month, just focus on it and make that project happen.
So I think open source is a big part of being able to sort of consume and understand projects like that. Like I know for a fact that I don't think I would have gotten where I am today in terms of software engineering if I hadn't such a wide body of work that I could go look at and reference. And I know you have a very extensive open source presence. I know you spend a lot of time on GitHub, I'm sure. What are some of the unique things about the open source flow, the open source model? And what are some interesting things that people who don't do software development on a day-to-day basis might find interesting about the whole open source and GitHub ideas? Yeah,
that's a really great point. Like, so I'm very involved in open source. I wish I could contribute more than I do, actually. I mean, I've contributed quite a lot. but not everything I program is open source. It is so valuable to me. Like what you just said about being able to look at the source code for things is like, I mean, like, if I couldn't do that, I would be way less productive. Like, there's absolutely no question. Like, being able to just look at how other people solve problems is extremely valuable. I do it all the time. Like, almost every time I'm interacting with somebody else's software or service or something, where possible, I just read their source code and then I understand, what I'm dealing with. So that's extremely valuable. I mean, I could go on about the subject of open source a lot. I mean, obviously, I'm very, very pro open source, as you guys all are. I think anytime you go about writing something not open source, you should have a very, very good reason for it not being open source. Open source should be the default. It's extremely valuable to write software and to be able to read other people's software and use other people's software that's open source.
So how does sort of the open source philosophy intersect with your own philosophy that you described earlier? How has it really influenced your work? How maybe has it approached your how has it affected your approach to Bitcoin in general?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I've been involved in open source. I mean, I've been at least interested in open source for almost as long as I've been involved in writing software and stuff. But I sort of became particularly interested in it because of Bitcoin. Because Bitcoin is only possible because of open source. So I like to say there are three principles to Bitcoin. And not just Bitcoin, but what I call the whole crypto finance space. One is that it's voluntary, one is that it's decentralized, and one is that it's open source. These three features distinguish Bitcoin and other crypto finance technologies from like everything else. It's what makes it different from the traditional financial system. It's what makes it different from so many other projects and undertakings in the world. So it's so absolutely key. Like it's like a part of my very philosophy that open source software it's literally a principle of this space, of the crypto finance space. So for me personally, I do write closed source software. And I guess the reason for that is, I sort of find myself in situations where basically other people have built things that it only makes sense for me to contribute to it if it's closed source. Like, I can't be the one responsible for making it open source. So here at BitGo we have, I would say most of our software is actually closed source. We have some open source things. We contribute to open source stuff. But our primary code base is closed source. So this wasn't my decision. I mean, this was a decision made by the people who created it originally. So we can't just dump the source code out in public because that would be a security problem. There could be lurking security flaws in our software that we haven't found yet. So we have to be very careful how we iterate in the direction of open source software. So one thing we do is new projects we create are open source. I'm working on a new project right now that's open source from day one. I haven't published it yet because it's just a work in progress. But I think that's sort of my strategy. Like, I think it's so absolutely critical. This whole space wouldn't exist if not for open source. So we have to we have to be a part of that ecosystem. If we try and separate or go off into some closed source world or something, no one would use our software. We'd be we wouldn't be people couldn't do what we were talking about a minute ago, where I look at other people's source code to figure out how it works. If people can't do that for ours, then they're hampered. They won't be able to interact with us. They won't be able to use our stuff as well. So I think it's just in our interest to do as much open source as possible.
And as a follow-up to that, go into a little bit about the Innovators Patent Agreement, because there's been some talk about it, and we would really like to hear what you have to say, representing BitGo and the projects you're working on.
Yeah. So the Innovators Patent Agreement is this sort of declaration by Twitter. I guess they were the ones who created it. It's about a patent, of course, is sort of this claim to an innovation, and it's a legal thing. It's purely legal. It is, the government acknowledges that you own this concept, and this enables you to use the law if you own a patent to, basically force people to pay you for the use of this patent. Or at least that's one use of it. Another use is that it sort of defends you against other people that might use patents against you. So if you own a patent, somebody else can't use that patent or a similar one against you because you own the particular idea or whatever. So patents make people like myself and a lot of us in the space very uncomfortable because it's not like Bitcoin was not a patent. Like this would never have made any sense if it had been patented. It would not be possible. No one would be. We wouldn't be able to freely just build stuff on Bitcoin if there was some company somewhere that owned a patent on Bitcoin. Nobody would build on it. We would just go build a different thing that did something similar but not based on the same ideas so that we could just freely build on it. So patenting things is a very uncomfortable idea to those of us in the space. However, I think there are legitimate reasons to create patents if you are defending yourself against others. So that's exactly what Mike Belshey did, I guess it was about 1.5 years ago, when he patented, in a nutshell, multi-sig web technology. And it's basically the particular way the BitGo wallet works, involving like encrypting private keys, sharing it between a server and stuff. He created a patent of this idea, and well, he filed a patent, so there's no officially hasn't been granted or anything yet. But like other people in the space, he doesn't want to own this idea. So we've committed as a company to following this Twitter patent agreement or whatever it's called. And what this is it basically says, A, we commit to not using this patent offensively. So I don't know if there's any legal way to do this. It's basically just a public commitment to not using it offensively. We commit to only using it defensively. And also the way the ownership of the patent is created, Mike Belshey and the other guy who's not at BitGo, I don't know the story of the other guy that's on the patent, but it's Mike Belshey and another guy, whose name I think is James. They will forever own the patent, and that way, if BitGo is ever bought by another company, let's suppose, for instance, BitGo, we sold ourselves to Google or something or whatever, to some other company. That company might not agree with our stance that we don't want to use this patent offensively. So this Twitter patent agreement says that basically the control of the patent stays with the authors. So they can they have to approve any uses of the patent or something like that, so that any future owners of the patent cannot use it offensively. So that's the idea of the patent agreement. I think I'm very uneasy about it, to be honest. I don't really have a better solution, because the reality is companies, there are patent trolls out there that if we don't own any patents, we're sort of setting ourselves up to be attacked by one of these patent trolls. So I think there's a good argument to be made to use it for purely defensive reasons. I feel like Bitcoin and related technologies make it possible, in my mind, to completely replace all of these traditional information technologies, such as patents. You can, for instance, one way you could solve this problem with Bitcoin is you can just create a document that defines what your idea is, what your technology is, hash it, and put the hash in the blockchain. And now you can prove at any future date that you had that idea at that time. There doesn't need to be a government, or central organization of any kind, affirming the existence of this patent. You can use technology to do that. So that's just the first step, but there are lots of other ways we could use technology to get around patents. But in any case, for right now, the situation we're in is we're trying to use patents purely for defense. I think there's sort of a conversation we've had with other Bitcoin companies. This is something independent of BitGo I've talked with a lot of people about in the space. We could, as a community, do things like create a new organization like the Bitcoin Foundation. Some people wanted the Bitcoin Foundation to do this. The Bitcoin Foundation could hold patents that are Bitcoin-related patents. That would be one way to try to remove the concern over using patents offensively. We could also do something where maybe it's not a separate organization. Maybe different Bitcoin companies come to some contract with each other not to use their patents offensively against one another. So those are all ideas. So I don't know what the end result of all this is going to be, but I think we're in the middle of, technology is changing so fast that patents, I hope, will be completely obsolete soon, but it's not the case yet. So that's it. That's our situation.
That's a really good answer, Ryan. I think I really like this idea that we may not need legal frameworks or governments to sort of enforce these things. Whether or not you agree with the idea of intellectual property, agree with this idea that you can even own somebody's thoughts, that's irrelevant for now. I do agree with you, and I think that they will go away eventually, but we're not there yet. I think what you're getting at, though, is that there's a wider use for the blockchain. It doesn't necessarily have to be Bitcoin. And I know you've been involved in a number of other projects that have done some very interesting things, such as proof of existence. But what I want to get at now is sort of your experience with Reddit and their crypto, what I presume was a crypto equity, where they were considering offering partial ownership of Reddit as a crypto asset. Can you talk a little bit about your experience there?
Yeah, so I joined Reddit for a lot of reasons. I think there was and there still is a lot of potential at Reddit for cryptocurrency technology, for crypto finance technology, for Bitcoin, and for all the related things. Reddit is this uniquely large, purely internet community. It's like Reddit is an example of, in my opinion, what Neal Stephenson talked about when he talked about files. So this is a concept from his Neal Stephenson, science fiction author. A file is like a group of sort of like-minded people that share values, not unlike a nation-state, although not at any particular location in physical space. They're just sort of related, and they have a community, and they have their own rules. But it doesn't have to be any one place, just like Reddit. It's this internet community where the people live all over the world, and this community could use a financial system. They need a way to pay each other, either pay each other money or to share in equity or whatever. Have literally a financial system for this file that is Reddit. So I think there's huge potential for that at Reddit. Reddit is much more appropriate for this than, say, Facebook. Reddit is pseudonymous. The users on Reddit they're not attached to their real world identities. It's whatever. You can make a new username, at any moment and create a new identity for yourself. That's a very internet way to do things. Facebook's not like that. Facebook's real identity. It's way too close to the real world. Reddit is purely internet. It's perfect for crypto finance. So I joined Reddit for this sort of big picture view of what we were going to do, and it was I believe it was primarily the CEO's idea to launch what we were calling a cryptocurrency, but it wasn't just a currency. It was going to be issuing, ideally, ownership of the company to the users of Reddit. So this would be a way for us to literally give ownership of the community to the users. So that's what we were creating. We were trying to create, it's a crypto equity. For legal reasons, we were trying to figure out how to not make it an equity, because if you look into the law of any of this stuff, you're like, as soon as you issue equity, you are basically, if you issue equity to a lot of people anyway, I think it's like over 500 people, you're legally a public company, and then you have to follow a whole bunch of laws over what it means to be a public company. Well, that's fine in some cases. This would have been totally inappropriate for Reddit. Like for one thing, the users would have to give up their personal identifying information to be able to have ownership, right? You have to reveal what your real name is. Well, almost all Reddit users are not, they don't use their real name. They're pseudonyms. So for legal reasons, we were trying to figure out, basically, if we can't give people equity, what can we do? But either way, we were going to give people something of value that ideally would represent as much ownership as we could give them without making it an equity. I think, and so there's a whole long story there, which I'd be happy to share if you're curious. I've shared it in other places, but in a nutshell, like legally, it was so challenging that Reddit was basically changed its mind about undertaking this project. So I think there's still a lot of potential for crypto finance technology at Reddit, but Reddit is probably, they basically have too much other stuff on their hands to be able to tackle this giant project. Like this would be a multi-year, probably at least millions of dollars, probably maybe tens of millions of dollars in legal fees to figure out how to do this and do it legally and pay for any possible licensing and stuff like that. So it ended up being, just purely for legal reasons, such a large project that Reddit is probably not going to do it anytime soon. I think they're officially still going to do it, but no one is working on it at the company, to my knowledge.
God, that's really such a shame. Like, it sounds like Reddit is such a perfect fit for this sort of new way of giving ownership over something to the people who are participating in it. Like, this is a totally, I mean, it's been an idea previously, but it's never really been possible technically until very, very recently. And it strikes me that, you know, the only reason that this isn't happening is because the government is basically coming, because of the existing legal frameworks. And it's going to take a long time for that to all get sorted out, and that's just a shame. Can you talk a little bit about what you think this sort of friction between regulation and where we are today and innovation, like what Reddit was trying to do, and what many other companies are also trying to do, but are increasingly having to leave the United States to actually go build these things solely for legal reasons?
Yeah. That's a very, very, very good question. So, I mean, there's sort of the general problem of innovative companies and regulation, just sort of period. Then there's the special case of the financial system. And the reason why the financial system is a special case is A, it's highly, highly regulated. B, the government has sort of a special interest in controlling the financial system. So I like to say it's just by far and away the most regulated industry. I mean, the government literally creates the money, right? It has a monopoly on the very core of the financial system. Although it's not really the government, it's the Federal Reserve, which is, you know, technically a private corporation. But it's basically corrupt. I mean, it's basically the banks and the government basically become one when we're talking about money and the banks and stuff. So there's a big conflict, which is, you know, I don't think that the banks are uninnovative. I think that, you know, they're made up of people, and they're very smart people, and I think a lot of them are actually very innovative people. But they've constructed a system that is just at its core is reliant on the law to create, you know, the structure of this system. And I think the whole notion of law is what's changing. The whole notion of having people decide what happens. So, for instance, if a judge declares, you know, this is the outcome, or someone who's, you know, at a financial system says, or in a financial, you know, in a bank or something, the person literally uses their brain power to decide whether or not a transaction is valid or not. That's a very human-powered, you know, structure, which is basically obsolete. You know, Bitcoin, no human being decides whether a transaction is valid. It's determined automatically by a network of computers all over the world, right? And that this can now work for money. It can work for everything else. So there's a conflict, which is, for one thing, the banks have an interest in preserving the status quo because they're literally like life and death dependent on this, right? If the nature of money is fundamentally changed into something different, then a lot of these businesses are just going to go away. A lot of people are going to lose their jobs. They're going to be their assets are going to go to zero. They don't want that to happen. So just like the music industry didn't want, you know, digital music, the banks don't want this stuff to change. So yeah, so there's a great conflict there between basically this new technology and the people that have built this system and rely upon the system and have interests in not improving, you know, the way things work. So you mentioned that some people will just leave the United States. So I've personally lived in the U.S. my whole life. You guys, I don't know if you've lived here your whole life, but I've lived here for my whole life. I wouldn't want to leave, but it's literally for years now has been on my periphery that if I have to leave, I will, because what might actually happen is with the new laws in New York, the BIT license, there were talks of regulations in all the states and stuff. Worst case scenario is it's just like what I'm trying to do is literally illegal, and so the only way I can do it is to go to another country. And that's literally like, it's a totally, a lot of people have already made this choice in space. A lot of people have moved to Switzerland. There are companies that are based in Switzerland that would have otherwise been based in the U.S. had the regulations not been so awful in the U.S. This is already happening. And another element to all this is that because the internet enables you to do business from anywhere, and Bitcoin, now we've got money that you can earn money from anywhere, there's like nothing tying people down. So you can just leave the country and go to another country. So long as they sort of accept you, you can just move and keep doing business in another country. So I think the reality is what will probably happen is there's going to be enormous pressure on governments. People will just leave, and they'll realize like, well, what are we going to do if we keep creating hostile regulation? This is going to be an absolute disaster because the people are just leaving and they're going to other countries that are more suitable. So I think they're going to be pressured to tone down the completely ridiculous regulation, because otherwise the economy will just fail, right? I mean, I don't know if it'll outright fail, but it's not going to be good for anybody in the U.S. if they just make this stuff illegal. People will just leave.
I love these observations, Ron, because I think you see the big picture as well as kind of the effect of this technology on the individual. And I do think it's possible in the Bitcoin space to miss the trees for the forest, and I didn't get that backwards. Like we see the big picture of how governments and Bitcoin are clashing, or these technologies in general, but we don't see how this affects the individual. And you talked a little bit about becoming an expatriate, finding ways of doing business with Bitcoin that are maybe more decentralized, maybe more for System D. I'm very interested in sort of if you have any thoughts on, and additional thoughts on how people can start using decentralized technologies now, these distributed technologies now, or just regular old digital technology, to become more free as individuals without waiting on these massive sea changes?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I'll just state what you just said is like true. You can today use these technologies to be a more free individual already. No one is actually stopping you from building some innovative technology, on the web using Bitcoin. You can do it. Now, what happens is people will threaten you. So the government, if you build something that, that verges on money laundering, which in my opinion, money laundering should not be considered a crime, but the government does consider it a crime. So, you can be threatened. But you can also do things like, hide your identity. So, you don't have to broadcast, your social security number or something like that. If you want to create a business for yourself, that's, I only encourage people to do, legitimate businesses. But, you can do whatever you want and hide your, your identity so that people can't, come and arrest you or whatever, right? People do this already. So this is, obviously the Silk Road 2, and whatever the new dark markets are. I don't like using them as examples because there's a lot of, there's some legitimate activity, but there's also genuine, criminal activity on these dark markets. But the reality is it's already happening. So, I mean, people already do this. You can do things like, send money to your family members in other countries, or send money to your friends or whatever. What if your family's today living in a country where for legal reasons you just can't get money to them? Maybe they're corrupt or whatever. You can just send money to them using Bitcoin, and there's just literally no barrier. You can do that right now. So the technology makes that possible already. So I think there's there are two issues here. One is sort of continuing to build the technology, because the technology is not ready for completely mass adoption yet. I think there are lots of scaling problems with Bitcoin and with everything else. Like it's if 7 billion people tried to start doing this stuff, it just would fail because it's not ready for that type of scale. So there's the technical problem. There's also the social problem of people are just not realizing what is now already possible. The fact that you can literally move to another country and earn a real high income internationally, and by starting a business in another country, you don't have to pay income tax. You can completely avoid paying income tax today if you move to Panama. You create a corporation in Panama, and the rules in Panama, there are still laws, and you'll be if you. I wouldn't advocate breaking the law, but completely legally, you can move to Panama today and start a business, and so long as your business is international, that the law is literally the case that you don't have to pay income tax. So that's already the case. You can do that right now. You can go move to Panama. Now, Panama is not the right place, for everybody, but already today the technology enables much, much greater freedom than I think most people have even tried to take advantage of.
It's really interesting. Like we're in the throes of this massive revolution, and that's what it is. It's a complete change in the way everything works. Bitcoin itself applies to finance. The crypto equity thing applies to corporate ownership, and there's a number of other things that are out there. I mean, decentralized voting, governance, all sorts of things. The world doesn't change overnight, and we're in the thick of this, right? And we're sort of like looking at, oh God, it's taking so long, all these regulations are so difficult. But then once it's all happened, and we're going to look back and be like, holy crap, the world did change overnight, is what it's going to look like on the other side. So as you're working on some of these other projects, one thing we haven't talked about yet is BitGo. What is your sense of what it's like on the ground to be a part of this? Do you feel that same undercurrent it's like taking forever, or do you really feel like things are moving quickly? What's your take on it?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. It feels like things are going slow, like on a daily basis, because I'm like, come on, let's make this stuff happen already. But exactly what you said, like I sit back and I sort of look at more of the big picture of it, and I think things are actually happening very, 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 very fast. I think, in 5 or 10 years we're going to look back, so much stuff is going to have happened. Like everything that we see happening now, like Wall Street is presently in the process of adopting Bitcoin. This is like incredible. I mean, like 4 years ago, when I discovered Bitcoin, Bitcoin was so small, like it was a joke to say that one day Wall Street would be like investing in a Bitcoin company, right? But it's actually now happening. This is happening. Wall Street, they're not just investing, they're like building on top of Bitcoin. Like Nasdaq has their new colored coins thing or whatever. That's absolutely incredible. So I think in the big picture here, things are happening very fast. Bitcoin is only, I think it's 6 years old, right? 2009 until 2015. So it's a little bit over 6 years. That's really short. I mean, that's a small fraction of my life. It's a small fraction of your guys' lives. It's absolutely amazing how big it's grown in 6 years. In another 6 years, it's going to be far larger. It's going to be orders of magnitude larger, I think. I mean, I could be wrong, but I think it will be. I think it's growing very fast. So I think on the time scale of like human civilization, this is happening in a flash. It's happening in a single generation, right? People that are adults now, their children are going to grow up in an absolutely, completely different world. In a single generation, things are completely different. So I think that's the big picture is it's happening very fast. It doesn't feel that way being on the ground because I guess I just see how much potential there is, and I feel like we're far away from fully achieving that potential. But when I sit back and look at, it's only been 6 years. I mean, it's happening very, very fast.
That's very well said, Ryan. I think this is a case where people maybe miss the forest for the trees, actually, of the day-to-day grind of working in Bitcoin. But there's also something very satisfying about that, knowing you're building what you're talking about. And before we close, we'd kind of like to ask what you're building right now. What can we expect from you, maybe to see from your work at BitGo? And what can our listeners check out right now on GitHub that maybe you're contributing to on your spare time?
Sure. So let's see. So first of all, in a nutshell, I joined BitGo because we're focusing on what I think is one of the most important problems in Bitcoin right now, which is security. We're a Bitcoin security company. We're trying to make it easier for people to not get hacked and not lose their Bitcoins, or if they do get hacked, they still don't lose their Bitcoins because it's multi-sig, right? So I am committed to solving that problem. It's a more near-term problem than some of the more grandiose colored coins or even Ethereum or something like that. I'm more in favor of these basic problems that I think have to be solved first. So that's the big picture of what I'm doing here at BitGo. I'm working on a few things. The only thing I think I've done publicly at BitGo so far is just work on our SDK. However, I'm working on at least one other open source project that we'll probably be launching, probably on the order of like a month or so. And I'll just say I don't want to say what it is, other than I will say it is a security project, and it is something that should help people improve their security. And it's particularly going to be useful for businesses. Like, it's not necessarily something that a consumer would use, but it'll be useful to other Bitcoin businesses. And it'll be open source, so that's cool. Yeah, I wish I could say what it is. I don't want to unveil it yet, but we will launch it probably on the order of months. There are other things. I'm still contributing to some open source projects. Like, I have my own Bitcoin library called FullNode, which has sort of a complicated history with BitPay's Bitcore project. But I'm still sort of involved with that, just implementing Bitcoin in JavaScript. I think there's still a need for more of that stuff. So I'm continuing to put. It's basically my free time that I'm putting into it. My full-time effort is focused more on these sort of very specific security problems. But in a big picture, I still I'm trying to contribute to the JavaScript Bitcoin world. And the reason why I choose JavaScript is just because this is the best way to reach the most people with the fewest lines of code. You can, by implementing stuff in JavaScript, it automatically works on every platform, and everybody in the world pretty much can run that code. So I'm still involved in that stuff. Yeah, so that's it.
Ryan, it's always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a fantastic interview. So thanks again for joining us, and that's Decentralize.
Thanks a lot, guys. It was awesome.